Welcome to Shifting Veils. This is where we discuss the unexplained, the possibly paranormal, and always strange. These are the types of things that have always interested me, but there's one particular subject under this umbrella that has heightened my curiosity since I was a child. My mom and I used to watch a show called Unsolved Mysteries together. Did you ever watch that? Did you ever
Oh
watch
yeah,
Unsolved Mysteries?
absolutely did. Yep.
It was awesome. I loved that show. In season 9 of the series, an episode by the title Up in Smoke aired focusing on the phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion, and it quite seriously terrified me and continued to haunt me well into my teens. I'm not quite sure when I stopped being so afraid of it, but my intrigue never ceased. I mean, how does a human body that is made up of 60% water just spontaneously erupt into flames?
It's funny that we're doing this because just the other day, I think I showed you I got a news headline up on my
Yeah,
phone that brought up a recent article about the study of spontaneous human combustion and why it happens and stuff like that. It's like,
that's so
well,
weird. That's
it
so
was by
funny, actually.
Popular Science, so
Huh. Just out of nowhere. But there wasn't a new case. It was just like out of the blue.
yeah, it was out of the blue, just like this article that was written up like last month or something. I was like, well, all right, AI.
Right?
We're going to discuss some cases of spontaneous human combustion and some of the science surrounding the phenomenon. Hopefully, by the end of this episode, we can all have a better understanding of what is possible and what is likely, and if this is truly what is happening and how.
Spontaneous human combustion, or SHC, was a rare but very real concern to many people in the 1800s, and it has actually been attributed to real deaths. Larry Arnold is a director of Parascience International, and in 1995, he wrote that there had been about 200 cited reports of SHC worldwide over the past 300 years. 200 may not seem like much over such a long period of time, but still, 200 is a substantial number of deaths.
Yeah,
SHC was made famous in pre 1900 fiction by writers like Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Washington Irving, and others. In more recent times, SHC appeared in movies and on television shows, including The X Files. I watched the shit out of that.
oh yeah. Only with David Duchovny though. With the other guy, I
Absolutely.
didn't care for it.
I don't listen. I was so David Duchovny. I didn't even know there was another guy that existed. This is
Oh
new to
yeah.
me.
Later in the series, David Duchovny leaves the X Files. I think Gillian Anderson stays, but I can't think of his name. The guy that played T-1000 in Terminator 2 became the guy that replaced Mulder.
Yeah, no, that's just wrong. That's not right at all. Yeah, I'm not ever watching that. So it appeared in movies, on television shows like X Files, Unsolved Mysteries, and it's even sort of the superpower of Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, in Fantastic Four comic books. I did say sort of, because I know his is a little bit different.
Yeah. Spontaneous human combustion simply means that a human body ignited and burned at a high temperature with no known accelerator or ignition point applied. Cases have been reported since the Middle Ages, and I'd like to know if there are natural explanations for the phenomenon.
Bizarre cases through the years of humans spontaneously combusting and dying have led to questions and theories about these incidents, but so far there's been no scientific basis that solidly support what is happening. According to the National Institutes of Health, in most cases of SHC, the body is found with significant portions of the middle parts of the body reduced to ash. Much less damage is done to the head and the extremities, and minimal damage is done to the direct surroundings of the body. So it's mostly like the trunk of the body
I was
that
gonna say
is, yeah,
the core right
yeah,
there. Yeah. Maybe it's the soul burning up. You know,
yeah, could be. That's might be a different episode. I'm not sure.
I think the most well-known case of SHC would be that of Mary Reeser. In July of 1951, her landlady went to her apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, with a telegram. She tried the door, and when she did, she found the metal doorknob to be hot to the touch and called emergency services, suspecting a fire. Reese's remains were found in the chair in which she had been sitting. WFLA TV in Florida reported that Reese's body disintegrated because of a fire,
Dang.
but the apartment she was in didn't have the kind of damage that a fire would produce. Another news agency reported that the 67-year-old woman's body was nearly cremated, except for certain
Wow.
parts of the body. Yeah, that's the what you said up there, the ash, the pile of
Yeah.
ash, right? So
Yeah.
all that remained of Reeser, who would become known as the Cinder Lady, were part of her left foot that was still wearing a slipper, her her backbone, and her skull. Her skull had actually shrunk to the size of a teacup. A fire would likely need to reach a temperature of about 1,832 degrees Fahrenheit in order to cause that type of bone shrinkage.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's like basically the dehydration of bone. Then I assume
Yeah.
because things shrink when they dehydrate, right?
That's just so small, though.
I mean, we got teacup dogs, so they fit in teacup skulls, I
I
guess.
know. That's just crazy, though.
In an FBI report obtained by WFLA TV, the news outlet noted that the room Reeser was found in was labeled mysterious. The condition of the woman's body told of a raging fire, but the room was untouched. Other than signs of extreme heat on the ceilings directly above the woman's body, there were no other effects to the room. I mean, wasn't really much of a body still there, but
Right.
where she last was.
Right. One thing I noticed in a lot of these spontaneous human combustion cases is that the ignition tends to be blamed on the victim's habit of smoking cigarettes, claiming the use of a match or a lighter or even the cigarette itself. But if you drop your match or your lit cigarette, do you not immediately retrieve it? Put out whatever burning ash may have fallen. I mean, even if you fall asleep with one and you catch your nightgown or shorts on fire, you'll be waking up and putting that out. So it just makes no sense that you'd find the remains all in a neat little ash pile in their seat.
I mean, it's like you might not wake up if you're imbibing in some alcohol, if you're
Maybe,
blackout drunk.
maybe, yeah.
But I mean so cigarettes and all that stuff worked differently back then too, as opposed to now because cigarettes are made with a retardant now, as opposed to then when it was just paper and tobacco and some gunpowder to keep the thing burning. But yeah, there's retardant. There's retardant in your cigarettes, people. So if you're smoking, just remember that you're also inhaling something that's supposed to stop the fire. So if it does drop, if you drop your cigarette, the cigarette's gonna end up burning itself out.
Best way to go is grow your own.
Yeah, grow your own, pack your own. It's cheaper too.
Definitely. At least pack your own. One of the cases I remember from Unsolved Mysteries was that of a woman by the name of Kay Fletcher. She actually seems to have possibly survived a case of spontaneous human combustion. According to her, one morning, out of nowhere, a cloud of smoke erupted from her body. She initially thought her sweater had caught fire. She had her husband look at her back because it felt as though she had blisters coming up. But he only found her skin to be red. Her husband claimed the source of the smoke was Kay's body itself, saying it was coming from her skin.
Smoking hot.
I'm surprised he didn't. He totally missed that opportunity.
I mean, maybe it's just not noted in the
Maybe
but
it was
I
edited
mean,
out of the show.
he had to have said something like that.
Right.
Baby,
So-
you're smoking hot.
Yeah. Her husband had actually worked at a crematorium earlier in his life, so he was familiar with the odor of human flesh burning, and that is what he said the smoke emanating from his wife smelled like.
Oh.
Yeah. In another case of one not so fortunate as Kay turned out to be, is the curious case of Robert Bailey in 1967. A group of London office workers were waiting for the bus around 5 a.m. on September 13th when they noticed flames in the upper window of a building. They immediately called the police, who rushed to the scene of the derelict building. There they found the still burning body of Robert Bailey, a homeless man. The police officer first to the scene reported that a blue flame was emitting forcefully from a 4-inch slit in Bailey's abdomen, which sounds wild to me. They managed to extinguish Bailey by forcing a hose into the abdominal cavity. No external means of ignition were found on his body. So it sounds like he was still burning, but he was already deceased.
Yeah, this is a little morbid, I guess, but the picture I get when you say that they reported a blue flame like emitting from a 4-inch slit in his abdomen, it makes me think of like a cauldron, not a cauldron, a furnace, with the grates on it, and you got
Yeah.
like the flame burning inside of it, but everything else, it's like surrounding it is still intact.
Yeah, like how force. See, I think of a torch because it says forcefully.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if it's just there and it's burning, then yeah, it kind of just seems like it's just burning. It's
It's
not
kind
like
of
shooting out, but I don't know.
it's kind of like an acetylene torch sort of thing, is what you're saying.
Yeah. So I don't know. That one's a weird one, and every single source I looked up on that one, it specifically says forcefully. So I don't know.
So it's definitely like raging straight like out of the hole.
Yeah,
It's not like just
it's a
a.
weird one.
Then there's Jeannie Saffin's case, which stands out with one unusual detail. Someone actually witnessed her combustion. She was 61 years old when she died, but had the mental development of a 6-year-old. According to her father, who was 82, he and Jeannie were both sitting in the kitchen when he saw a bright surge of light out of the corner of his eye, and he turned to ask his daughter if she had seen it. But to his shock, when he turned his head to look at her, she was on fire, but just sat still with her hands in her lap. He yanked her over to the sink to try to put out the flames, and in the process of doing so, he disfigured his hands. And Jeannie suffered full thickness burns on her face, hands, and abdomen, meaning the flesh was burned down to the fat. She lapsed into coma and died 8 days later.
See, that one's weird too. I, I know it sounds horrible, but he says something about he sees a light flash. Was was she sitting there with a magnifying glass, maybe? Because I know that sounds horrible. I'm being horrible.
Well,
That's
so no, but the thing that like interests me there actually is that she was just sitting there, and if her hands are in like the way that I'm thinking, like maybe just like her hands politely crossed on the
yeah,
table, kind of like waiting for breakfast or
yeah.
a cup of tea or
That's what I'm
whatever.
thinking too.
Like, and this flash happens, and there's no like panic in her, like that really like that seems so strange to me because you would think if your body is going into some sort of trauma, you have some sort of reaction, but it sounds like she had no reaction whatsoever.
She has the mentality of a 6-year-old. I think of myself as 6 years old. If I am on fire, I would have been freaking out. I wouldn't have
Hmm.
been sitting there with my hands politely placed in my lap, sitting, poised and sweet and everything.
Mm-hmm.
No, I would be freaking out. I would probably be feeding the fire because I'd be flinging my arms around everywhere, acting like a lunatic. At 6 years old, I mean, or maybe I would have remembered to stop, drop, and roll. I would have at least gotten through kindergarten by then. So, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It's really weird. With this stuff, we just have to go by what has been written about these things. And
Mm-hmm.
it just, I have so many questions. It always leaves so many questions. It just doesn't, I don't know. It's just strange.
I mean, that's what happens when you like look into the side of like the world, though. Is like you end up with more questions. You never like come up with just a straight answer. You come up with
Yeah.
answers that lead to more questions.
And then we just keep digging
Yep.
in the constant pursuit of knowledge.
Yep.
I think the victim that stands out the most to me out of all of the ones that I've read over time would be George Mott of Crown Point, New York. George had serious lung problems and needed an air pump and a face mask just to help him breathe. He was not a smoker, as some of our other victims are. And going back to the prior one, she obviously wasn't a smoker.
I mean,
Well,
could
I
have been
guess
a
she could
rebellious
have. She
6-year-old.
wasn't actually 6.
You're right.
But okay. So the night that George Mott burst into flames, or the night before George Mott burst into flames, he was enjoying an episode of The Twilight Zone. Afterward, he said, "Nothing weird like that ever happens to me. I wish it would." And I guess you know where this is going. The next day, according to Weird New England, his son found 3.5 pounds of bone and ash that used to be George Mott. An investigation came up with no means of external ignition whatsoever. Another kicker in George Mott's case was he was a retired fireman.
If he was a retired fireman, I would think there'd be a bit more than 3.5 pounds of bone and ash.
That's harsh.
There'd be a lot of muscle then, or fat.
Okay, we'll just go with muscle. Because
We're
the
gonna
other
go
one
with
sounded
muscle.
really bad. The other one sounded really mean.
It wasn't meant to be mean. Firemen are physically fit. Firemen
Yes.
have to do a lot.
Yep, you're
So,
right.
you know,
They are. Yeah,
it
they
wasn't
are.
meant to sound mean.
Bad. Larry Arnold, the same guy I mentioned earlier from the Parascience International Organization, said that incredible localized damage was done to George Mott's body. He was incinerated to an extent that forensic experts said could only be replicated inside a crematorium operating at 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit or more for 12 hours.
12 hours.
Mott's TV had melted, but most of his bedding was undamaged, and his air mask was still pumping through his face mask.
So, pure oxygen I assume it's pure oxygen,
If it's
that's
pure oxygen,
more
then
flammable.
if it's pure oxygen, I would think the tank would have exploded. When you've got a
Yeah.
fire that close.
Yeah.
I mean, this isn't like bedding and other types of materials that are flammable. This is like a highly combustible, you know what I mean?
Right, yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Maybe it's made of that slipper material.
So with George, you have a case where it's obvious there was no lit cigarette nearby, and the guy was even a retired fireman. So I don't know. That was always a really curious case to me. It's just different.
The most recent documented case occurred in September of 2017 when 70-year-old John Nolan spontaneously burst into flames while walking down a street in North London. John was airlifted to Broomfield Hospital with third-degree burns on 65% of his body. And sadly, John passed away the next evening while in the hospital. At the time, investigators were unable to establish a reason for the incident, and John's death was treated as unexplained. Some passersby who stopped said they witnessed John's clothes mysteriously catch fire and ran over to help him out. It happened just yards from his home on a quiet Sunday afternoon walk. A post-mortem examination revealed that the cause of death was severe burns without any further explanation. An official inquest was opened at North London Coroner's Court in March 2018 to further examine and explain the mysterious circumstances surrounding John's death. The coroner determined that John's death was not a deliberate act by himself or anyone else, and that a flammable liquid was not involved in the fire.
So again, it just seems that these cases of spontaneous human combustion happen, and while they have a common MO, they aren't always exactly the same. Nolan was out for a walk, not sitting at home in his easy chair smoking a cigarette or drinking a beer. He's out on a lazy stroll near his home. Fires do not typically start on their own. However, many things can self-ignite without exposure to flames under the right circumstances, like coal dust or piles of compost and used oily rags. But it's a different matter to claim that people can burst into flames for no apparent reason. And what about the source of ignition? A century ago, it was sometimes blamed on God's wrath.
Yeah, I mean, he's up there with a magnifying glass.
Yes, like we're ants, you know? Most victims were assumed to be drunkards who had saturated their cells with alcohol. In the 1970s, an explanation suggesting that a person's depressive emotional states could somehow cause him or her to become inflamed. I am in trouble if that's the
I was
case.
gonna say that can't be the case because we've both lived long enough.
I think in both the alcohol and depressive explanations, there would be far more cases happening. Sunspots and cosmic storms, they've also been blamed, yet these explanations are pseudoscientific and there's no evidence for any of them. Both sunspots and cosmic storms occasionally affect the magnetic field on Earth, but that only seems to interfere with communications and power grids, not
Yeah.
igniting people.
Right. Well, maybe now that maybe that's the explanation for those 200 people.
There's there's something called the wick theory, and at times I could see it possibly being the cause, but it does require an open flame. The wick effect is partial or total destruction of a human body by fire when the clothing of the victim soaks up melted human fat and acts like the wick of a candle. So essentially, the best way to explain this phenomenon would be to say someone is sitting or laying in bed, sitting in a chair, laying in bed, and they're smoking a cigarette, and they fall asleep and drop the lit cigarette on themselves, and are either incapacitated by some other health reason or are just a deep sleeper and they don't wake up to extinguish the smoldering cigarette. What's smoldering? What the? What the? I just made up a new
I
word.
thought you said smoldering. I heard smoldering.
Okay. I did not the first time. So it burns through the clothing slowly, burns through the skin, where it then gets to the underlying fat that has now melted because of the heat from the slow burning, smoldering fire. So now the fat soaks into the surrounding clothing and just continues to burn away the victim. You have to understand that this process would be ongoing for hours and would reach the high temperatures mentioned previously in the episode. It's kind of like what that guy said earlier, like 12 hours that fire burned at what,
Three
3,000
three
degrees.
thousand, yeah.
Wick theory can be backed scientifically as a possible component of spontaneous human combustion, but again, it requires an open flame in certain situations. Not all of these victims are sitting and smoking a cigarette, so they're still left with there's still a lot that's unexplained.
So, actually, this reminds me of the article. Remember the article I was just talking about that came up on from Popular Science that came up on my phone just the other
Yeah.
day?
Yeah.
So, part of that article had said that part of the reason, like some of these spontaneous human combustion cases happened, they didn't say all of them, but when a body is heated, it's hot out, and they're wrapped in a blanket, because this was one of the examples they gave in the article. The body is wrapped in a blanket, and a fire starts on the blanket, and they've fallen asleep. The fire gets going. They can't feel the heat until the heat goes through the blanket, and by then the body's already overheated, and it's like they're like you hit that high temp in the or high body temp,
Yeah.
and you're in and out of passing out basically.
Yeah,
So the
true.
blanket burns. The blanket burns hot enough to where it starts melting the body fat. This could cause the wick effect, basically, right?
Yeah.
So it causes that. So that was one of the examples given in the article, and it was. I hated that article popping up because I was like, "You guys are trying. You guys are popular science. You guys are trying way too hard to try and explain this."
I watched one video where this guy, I didn't really understand the wick theory all that well until I watched this video. This guy basically, he had a trailer and he set it up like a home. So he had like a chair and a side table, and he can't use a human test subject, so he brings in a hog, a really large pig. And the pig is wrapped in a blanket. That's kind of funny too. Pigs in a blanket. Anyway, they tossed this pig wrapped in a blanket in this trailer next to this chair, and the guy takes a lit cigarette and puts it on the blanket. It lights the blanket, and then the blanket is just kind of like slowly burning. Like, there's not actually a flame. You cannot see a flame, but the blanket is burning. And because it's just like this slow smolder, that fat underneath the flesh that hasn't yet burned yet is starting to melt already. So once it burns through the blanket down to the flesh, it's almost immediate that burned fat has access to the blanket, and it soaks quickly into the blanket. And that pig burned just like all the other pictures I've seen of these victims. It was mostly the middle part of his body. His head, his front legs, and his back legs, that didn't burn. It was mostly the middle part of him where that blanket was wrapped around him. So the wick effect started making a lot of sense to me after that. But still, you have to have an ignition point. When you have someone like George Mott that doesn't smoke cigarettes, what happened? What did it? So
Right.
it might have happened to some of these cases. That might have been what happened,
Well,
but
and
not all of them.
see, and that was my argument with the article that I read was like they're explaining they explained spontaneous human combustion in one way, which was the wick theory, which you and I discussed,
Yeah.
off podcast and on podcast.
Yeah.
And so now you understand how it works. And I was figuring it out. But like there are so many like mysterious cases like Safin just
Yeah.
sitting at the table and it's just
Or Noland walking down the street.
right. And it's just there's so like you were just saying, there's so many cases where it's just
It doesn't make sense.
mysterious. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? Is this some weird science? Is it the wrath of gods? Is there some other explanation that modern science just hasn't found? Leave us a comment or send us an email and share your thoughts with us. We'd like to know what you think.
And tonight, that will wrap tonight's episode up. Let's close our books, close our tabs, and close our minds until next time when we discuss the Black Shuck. I'm Isaiah,
And I'm Michelle.
and this has been Shifting Veils.